Post-World War II Japan by Michael Barretto, Austin McCarmy, Nathaniel Matthews, and Blake Meek. The effects of Japan's defeat in World War II on the country's internal development and relationships with other countries, especially the effects of Article 9, the Peace Constitution, and the legacy of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Post-war Japanese economic takeoff was due to a variety of factors that had to do with American policies toward Japan, the international market, social mobilization, existing industrial capacities and experience, and government policies. The Japanese economy experienced a rapid development in manufacturing, metals, and machinery. The Japanese auto industry produced many new manufacturers after the government drove out GM and Ford Motors. After World War II, many of the military technologies were converted to peaceful technologies that could be used for everyday use. Nationalism and the desire to help catch up with the West persisted after World War II, but now the efforts were focused on economic and industrial goals. For example, machine gun factories were converted to make sewing machines. Optical weapon factories now produce cameras and binoculars. In 1950, the breakout of the Korean War was one of the most important boosts for the Japanese economy. During this time, Japan restructured all of their factories with the latest machinery, and millions of former soldiers came back to work in the factories. Japan was able to create a diligent and hard-working workforce because of their strict educational system. This was one of the major ways that the Japanese economy was able to boom after 1945 until present day. In today's world, Japan is an economic superpower. Modern Japan's foreign policy was shaped at the outset by its need to reconcile its Asian identity with its desire for status and security in an international order dominated by the West. The principal foreign policy goals of the Meiji period from 1868 to 1912 were to protect the integrity and independence of the nation against Western domination and to win the equality of status with the leading nations of the West by reversing unequal treaties. Because fear of Western military power was the chief concern of the Meiji leaders, their highest priority was building up the basic requirements for national defense under the slogan, "Wealth in Arms." They saw that a modern military establishment required national conscription drawing manpower from an adequately educated population, a trained officer corps, a sophisticated chain of command, and strategy and tactics adapted to contemporary conditions. Finally, it required modern arms together with the factories to make them, sufficient wealth to purchase them, and a transportation system to deliver them. After Japan's surrender in World War II, Japan's diplomatic policy has been based on close partnership with the United States and emphasis on international cooperation. In the Cold War, Japan took a part in the World War's confrontation of the Soviet Union in East Asia. Japanese foreign policy was not confident in their economic growth. The Japanese government found it best to participate in the peacekeeping to avoid further conflict with different countries. In recent years, Japan has engaged in more active foreign policy, giving credit to the responsibility for its economic growth. In 2007 and 2008, Prime Minister Fukuda stressed a new path in his recent policy speech to the Diet. Japan aspires to become a hub of human resource development as well as for research and intellectual contribution to further promote cooperation in the field of peace building. During the 19th century, Japan has become more interested in the expansionist in European history. Japan had demands of trade coming from Western countries, and Japan finally agreed through Matthew Perry, Commodore of the U.S. Navy. However, after Japan's harsh defeat after World War II, Japan's society and culture was starting to fade and to become more influenced by the U.S. in political, economic, and cultural aspects. After the defeat of Japan in World War II, there is the question of whether Japan should be responsible for its own military rather than being dependent on another country through alliances. Japan gives an important objective of the military buildup was to gain the respect of the Western powers and achieve equal status for Japan in the international community. The treaties imposed on Japan when the country was first open to foreign intercourse symbolized inequality of status. The treaties were objectionable to the Japanese not only because they imposed low fixed tariffs on foreign imports and thus handicapped domestic industries, but also because their provisions gave a virtual monopoly of external trade to foreigners and granted extraterritorial status to foreign nationals in Japan, excusing them from Japanese jurisdiction and placing Japan in the inferior category of uncivilized nations.
The effects of its defeat in World War II gave post-war Japan a dark fascination with nuclear disaster, a cynicism towards war and authority, and an obsession with new technology and Western culture, which were exhibited through pop culture staples like movies, anime, and art. In the classic 1954 monster movie Godzilla, the titular monster is used to represent the United States atomic bomb when the creature levels Tokyo and reduces it to a radioactive cinder all in one night. Godzilla was the atomic bomb in the flesh, literally spawned by underwater nuclear testing. The many ship disasters in the beginning of the film represent Japan entering the war and the merchant vessels that were sunk by American submarines during the attack on the island. When Godzilla first attacks Tokyo, the self-defense force is quick to react against the threat, but ultimately fails in stopping the rampage. Their futile efforts represent the cynicism of the Japanese people towards the pre-war government's militaristic views. The eventual defeat of Godzilla represents the hope that the Japanese people can recover from the war, but the threat of the monster's return, like the continuing dangers of nuclear power, remains. Japan's interest in science and technology and its first-hand experience of the devastating effects of World War II influenced the tone and attitude of a new genre of Japanese animation, or anime, characterized by gloom and melancholy that set it apart from American cartoons. This can be seen in the post-apocalyptic series Neon Genesis Evangelion, in which the remnants of humanity struggle to survive after being ravaged by an alien species known as angels. The advancing technologies of World War II gave rise to the Japanese interest in giant combat robots that used advanced weaponry to attack their enemies. This can be seen in the series Gao Gaigar. Reflecting post-war Western influence, women have prominent roles in anime and in some cases surpass men with their skills and abilities. Gunbuster, for example, has a predominantly female cast that all operate large war robots. The great Japanese anime director Hayao Miyazaki shows his distaste for war and violence in many of his movies. In The Castle in the Sky, the main characters Pazu and Shita only use violence to attack a terrible weapon that can destroy humanity. This weapon is used earlier in the film to create an explosion that resembles a nuclear blast. Miyazaki conveys his cynicism towards the government and military in Porco Rosso, in which the government is an enslaver eager to conscript free men to fight, kill, and die in pointless wars. He addressed in Article 9 of the Japanese post-war constitution, which forbids Japan from forming an army for offensive purposes. In Yukinori Yanagi's Banzai Corner, Yanagi is rows of red and white Ultraman figures to symbolize the blind nationalism of Japanese troops. In Yoko Ono's Play It by Trust, viewers are invited to play a game of chess on an all-white board with all-white pieces. This symbolizes the futility of war by making it difficult to distinguish enemy from ally.